There is a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being physically isolated, but from feeling unseen, misunderstood, out of rhythm with the world around you. It's the kind of loneliness that sits quietly behind your smile, the kind that follows you even when you're surrounded by people, the kind that makes you wonder, why do I feel alone, even when I'm not? And the truth is, being alone and feeling alone are two very different things. Being alone is a state, a moment, a physical condition. But feeling alone, that's emotional, psychological, invisible. It's the sense that no one truly gets you, or that your internal world is so detailed, so layered, so different from the noise outside that it becomes difficult to translate. Because introversion is not simply about liking to be by yourself. It's an entire ecosystem of thoughts, intuitions, sensitivities, and emotional textures that few people ever see. You observe more than you speak. You think more than you react. You feel deeply even when you don't express it. And sometimes your mind becomes so rich, so full, so alive within itself that the external world starts to feel like a place you visit, not the place you live. This is where the misunderstanding begins. People think introverts avoid others, but the truth is far more subtle. You don't avoid people, you avoid draining interactions. You avoid shallow conversations that leave you emptier than before. You avoid environments where you're forced to perform instead of exist. You avoid noise that drowns out your own thoughts. But what do you do when solitude, the place where you usually find clarity, starts to feel heavy? When the quiet becomes too loud? When the space you use to recharge becomes a space you hide in? When your internal world becomes both sanctuary and prison? This is where emotional loneliness begins. When you feel disconnected, not because you lack people, but because you lack connection. Real connection, honest connection, the kind that meets you where you actually are, not where the world expects you to be. And so you begin drifting. You become present, but not fully, engaged, but not emotionally, surrounded, but not understood. Many introverts carry this silent weight for years, the weight of feeling different, the weight of thinking too much, the weight of sensing more than you can articulate, the weight of believing that your inner world is something others wouldn't understand. But here's something you may not have realized. You don't feel alone because there's something wrong with you. You feel alone because the way you experience life is rare, because you inhabit your thoughts more deeply than most, because your solitude is where your truth lives, and truth isn't something everyone is comfortable with. This chapter is the doorway, the beginning of understanding why solitude affects you the way it does, why you retreat, why you reflect, why you search, why being alone can feel like peace, and feeling alone can feel like pain. And the deeper we go, the more you'll see that your loneliness isn't a flaw. It's a signal, a compass, an invitation to discover who you really are. There is a world inside you that most people will never see, not because you're hiding it, but because it doesn't translate easily into sound. Introverts don't live primarily through external stimulation. They live through internal experience, through reflection, through subtle emotional shifts, through layers of quiet awareness that happen beneath the surface. This is why you recharge differently. For many people, energy comes from interaction, from the buzz of conversation, movement, noise, excitement. They draw strength from the world outside themselves. But you draw energy from the world within. Every time you're around noise, crowds, constant conversation, or social expectations, your mind begins to work overtime. You're not just listening to what people say. You're reading their tone, their body language, their emotional atmosphere. You're processing meaning behind the words, picking up on tension, intention, subtle cues. You're filtering thousands of microsignals at once, and that is why social environments drain you. Not because you're weak, not because you're shy, not because you can't handle people, but because your mind does not simply participate. It absorbs, it interprets, it analyzes, it feels. Every interaction becomes a full-body experience. Most people walk into a room and only see faces. You walk into a room and feel the temperature of the room shift. You sense dynamics, unsaid truths, unspoken tensions. Your brain scans everything, even when you don't want it to. This constant inward processing requires energy, and so you retreat, not to escape people, but to return to yourself. Solitude becomes your oxygen, your sanctuary, your reset button, a place where your thoughts finally stop clashing with the world's volume, a place where you can breathe without performing, where your mind can stretch out and settle into its natural rhythm. But here is the part many introverts struggle to understand. Solitude feels safe until it slowly begins to isolate you. There's a point where the quiet becomes too quiet, where your thoughts stop grounding you and begin circling you, where you start choosing solitude not just to recharge, but to avoid disappointment, avoid judgment, avoid emotional labor, avoid the unpredictability of people. And when this happens, you don't just become recharged. You become distant, detached, harder to reach, harder to read, harder for others to truly know. Introverts walk a thin line between rest and withdrawal, between comfort and numbness, between protecting energy and building walls. And the truth is, you often don't notice when you've crossed it. But this inner landscape, this inner complexity is not a flaw. It is a sign that you experience life at a depth most people will never understand. A sign that your mind requires space, silence, and slowness to function at its best. A sign that your sensitivity is not weakness, but a different kind of strength. The key is learning when solitude heals you and when it begins to hide you, because the next chapter will reveal what happens when silence becomes a mirror, reflecting not just who you are, but everything you have been avoiding. Silence has a strange way of revealing the things we try hardest to outrun. When the world around you quiets down, your inner world gets louder. Thoughts you've postponed, feelings you've pushed aside, truths you've diluted to keep the peace, they all rise to the surface. Most people think solitude is just being by yourself. But true solitude, the kind that settles into your bones, is something very different. It is a mirror, a reflective space that shows you not who you pretend to be, but who you truly are beneath your roles, your masks, your obligations. And this is why silence can be uncomfortable, even frightening, because it strips away distractions. When you're alone, the noise stops telling you who to be. There's no social script to follow, no expectations to mold yourself into, no voices pulling you into 1,000 directions. There is only you and everything you haven't fully looked at. Your insecurities echo, your doubts sharpen, your suppressed emotions stir. Everything inside you becomes louder because there is nothing outside you to drown it out. This is why some people fear solitude, not because they fear isolation, but because they fear meeting the parts of themselves they've neglected. Carl Jung called this inner space the inner room, a psychological chamber where your unfiltered self lives. Not the self shaped by society, not the self adjusted for approval, but the raw, instinctive, honest self that carries your truth. Most people avoid this room. They keep the door cracked just enough to function, but never enough to understand. They avoid silence because silence demands awareness. They avoid stillness because stillness demands truth. They avoid solitude because solitude demands self-confrontation. But introverts, you walk into this inner room naturally. It's where your mind retreats when the world becomes too loud. It's where your thoughts stretch out, explore, analyze, unravel. It's where you process life, not through action, but through reflection. And yet, this room can also magnify feelings you've been carrying for years without realizing it. If you feel inadequate, solitude amplifies it. If you fear abandonment, solitude stirs it. If you carry unresolved grief, solitude brings it to the surface. If you question your worth, solitude leaves you with the question long enough that you finally have to answer it. Silence doesn't create your insecurities. It reveals them. It pulls them out from the corners of your subconscious and places them gently, or sometimes forcefully, into your awareness. And this is not a punishment. It's an invitation, because your inner room is where the real work begins. It's where your intuition speaks, where your emotional patterns become visible, where your shadow makes itself known. And as unsettling as it can be, this is the place where self-discovery begins. The world shows you who you should be. Solitude shows you who you are. And in the next chapter, you will learn why loneliness and solitude, though often confused, belong to very different psychological worlds, and why understanding the difference changes everything. There is a truth many people never learn. You can be surrounded by people and still feel painfully, overwhelmingly alone. Because loneliness has nothing to do with proximity, it has everything to do with connection. Loneliness is the absence of being understood. Aloneness is the presence of yourself. One wounds you, the other restores you. Most introverts know this difference intuitively. You can walk into a crowded room, hear laughter, conversations, energy flowing everywhere, and yet feel as if there's a glass wall between you and everyone else. You're there, but you're not with them. The connection is physical, but not emotional. An emotional connection is what introverts crave. Deep, sincere, soul-level connection. The kind that feels meaningful. The kind that doesn't demand performance. The kind that doesn't drown your inner world, but invites it. This is why introverts often have fewer deep connections. Not because they are antisocial, not because they dislike people, but because their capacity for connection depends on depth, not numbers, because they want conversations that feel alive. They want authenticity, not small talk, presence, not noise, understanding, not convenience. And these kinds of connections, they are rare, which means the introverted heart often feels underfed. But there's another layer, a psychological layer, one most people never recognize: attachment styles. The way you relate to others, the way you open up, the way you trust, the way you protect yourself, all of it shapes how you experience loneliness. If you're an introvert with an anxious attachment style, you may crave closeness deeply, but fear being too much. If you're an introvert with an avoidant attachment style, you may feel safer alone, but secretly long for someone who understands you. If you're fearful avoidant, you may oscillate, wanting connection one moment, pushing it away the next. Combine any of these with introversion, and emotional distance becomes both a shield and a struggle. You want connection, but you want it safely, slowly, genuinely, without pressure, without pretending. And because the world rarely offers this kind of relationship, you retreat. You choose solitude because it never misunderstands you. You choose aloneness because it feels predictable. You choose your inner world because it feels like home. But here is the paradox that shapes so much of the introverted experience. The more time you spend alone, the more protective you become of that space. And the more protective you become, the harder it feels to let someone in. Not because you don't want connection, but because connection requires vulnerability. And vulnerability requires trust. And trust requires someone who sees you, not just your presence, but your depth. Loneliness hurts. Aloneness heals, and understanding the difference gives you power. In the next chapter, we'll explore why the world, loud, overstimulated, often feels misaligned with your nature, and why introverts struggle to feel at home in environments that never slow down. If you've ever felt out of rhythm with the world, like everyone else is moving too fast, talking too loudly, demanding too much, it's not your imagination. Modern society is built for the loud, for the quick, for the socially fluent, for people who thrive in constant stimulation, rapid interaction, and endless noise. Extroverted behavior isn't just encouraged, it's rewarded. Schools praise the participators. Workplaces praise the team players. Social circles praise the energetic ones. Even relationships favor the ones who can openly express, perform, connect on money. And so introverts grow up believing something is wrong with them, that their quiet is a flaw, that their slowness is laziness, that their depth is unnecessary, that their need for solitude is selfish or strange. When in reality, introverts simply operate on a different psychological frequency, a frequency that the modern world rarely slows down enough to hear. This is why introverts often feel out of sync, like they're living one half step behind everyone else. It's not because they can't keep up. It's because they're processing more, thinking more, feeling more. And while the world rewards speed, introverts live through depth. While the world rewards expression, introverts live through introspection. While the world rewards constant availability, introverts need moments of stillness to breathe. But in a culture where silence is mistaken for disinterest and quietness for weakness, Introverts begin to mask. You've probably done it without even noticing, forcing yourself to smile longer than you feel comfortable, pushing through conversations you don't have the energy for, pretending to be on even when your mind is begging for rest, laughing on cue, acting extroverted to make others comfortable. This masking is a survival mechanism, a way to blend into a system that wasn't designed for your nature, but it comes at a cost. The cost is hidden exhaustion, a kind of tiredness that sleep doesn't repair, a deep internal fatigue from constantly overriding your own wiring. Because the truth is, introverts don't get tired from people because they dislike them. They get tired because they process every interaction like a full sensory experience. Every emotion, every tone, every shift in energy, every unspoken tension. And when you're forced to stay on in environments that don't align with your inner pace, you begin to lose pieces of yourself. You shrink to fit the space. You mute your natural rhythm. You stretch your emotional capacity until it frays. This is why the world often feels too loud, not just in sound, but in expectation, too loud in how quickly it moves, too loud in how shallow it connects, too loud in how little it listens. Quiet people are told to speak up, but rarely asked what they're thinking. They're told to socialize more, but rarely understood when they need space. But your quiet isn't a mistake. Your depth isn't a burden. Your slow, observant nature isn't a flaw. It's simply mismatched with a world that rarely stops long enough up to notice the power of silence. In the next chapter, we'll step into the shadow side of this. What happens when solitude becomes a refuge and a trap, and how isolation begins to reshape the mind from the inside. Solitude is healing until it isn't. There comes a moment when the silence you once cherished begins to feel heavier than noise. A moment where being alone no longer restores you. It isolates you. Every introvert knows this shift. It doesn't happen suddenly. It happens quietly, subtly, like a slow descent into an inner cave. A few canceled plans, a few emotional withdrawals, a few moments of "I just need space" that turn into days, then weeks. At first, solitude feels like safety, a place free from judgment, pressure, and overstimulation. But when the world outside feels too loud, too fast, too unpredictable, you begin to retreat not for peace, but for protection. You retreat from disappointment, from conflict, from emotional labor, from vulnerability. And slowly, solitude stops being a sanctuary and becomes a shield. This is where the darker side of isolation begins, when avoiding the chaos outside becomes easier than engaging with yourself inside, because solitude doesn't just quiet the world, it amplifies your inner patterns. The thoughts you've suppressed find their voice. The wounds you've avoided surface. Your fears, insecurities, and unresolved emotions gather in the silence and reflect back at you. This is the shadow of the introverted mind, the parts of yourself you don't want to see, but can't escape when you're alone. You may start feeling disconnected, yet unsure why. Social interactions feel like heavy labor. Your emotions flatten. Your motivation fades. You drift through your days as if watching your own life from a distance. And here's the quiet truth. Introverts often mistake emotional numbness for peace, but numbness isn't peace. It's self-protection in disguise, a survival response, a refusal to feel what solitude is trying to show you. Yet within this darkness lies an opportunity, because the shadow isn't your enemy, it's your unspoken truth. It's the part of you that's been asking to be acknowledged, integrated, understood. Carl Jung believed that the shadow is the doorway to wholeness, and for introverts, this doorway appears most clearly in stillness. Solitude can break you down, but it can also reveal who you are beneath the layers of obligation, conditioning, and fear. When you face your inner shadows, you begin to understand your emotional patterns, your triggers, your wounds, your desires, your boundaries, your truth. Healing begins not when you escape solitude, but when you learn to sit with it without drowning in it. And once you begin that work, a new form of solitude emerges, one that doesn't isolate but strengthens. In the next chapter, we enter that transformation, not just surviving solitude, but using it to build a life aligned with who you truly are. Once you learn to navigate the shadows within your solitude, you begin to enter the most powerful stage of self-discovery, the stage where being alone no longer feels like abandonment, but alignment. This is where the real transformation begins, because solitude, when approached consciously, becomes a teacher. It reveals your desires, your values, your creative impulses, your emotional truths that were too quiet to hear in the noise of everyday life. You begin to understand what energizes you and what drains you, what kind of people nourish your spirit, and what kind of connections feel hollow. You stop forcing conversations that suffocate you. You stop tolerating relationships that demand versions of you that no longer exist. You stop betraying your nature. Healing isn't about escaping solitude. It's about transforming your relationship with it. Because when you are no longer at war with your own inner world, solitude becomes freedom. Expression becomes effortless. Connection becomes meaningful. And your life begins to feel like it finally fits. You don't overcome loneliness by filling your life with people. You overcome loneliness by becoming someone you no longer abandon, even in the quietest moments.